Welcome to Real Vision. I'm Ed Harrison talking to Dr. Charles Kennedy, who is the CEO and managing partner of Blue Ox Healthcare Partners. Charles, welcome to Real Vision.
Thanks so much for having me.
I was telling you just before that, in fact, one of the great things about talking to you is that we're very topical in terms of the pandemic right now. Healthcare innovation is what you and I are going to be talking about. We're going to get into the pandemic at some point in time, but I think that when I think about you being in this space and your storied career, for me, it's about saving lives. How you got into the space that you're in. Maybe you can walk us through how you are thinking about innovation in healthcare and why it matters for you specifically.
Well, when I was early in my career, I really intended to be a physician practicing internal medicine in an inner city environment. And I became so frustrated with the bureaucracy, with the administrative overhead, that I began to think, a physician who was trained in the areas of how to make processes more efficient, more effective, how to look at outcomes from more of a business or efficiency perspective, might be something very valuable to the healthcare sector. And so I ended up getting my MBA down at Stanford and really crafted a career more in the direction of the intersection of technology, innovation, and financial incentives. And so the way I think about innovation is, if you do the same thing over and over again, your likelihood of getting a different outcome is, of course, zero. And when we look at the healthcare system today, we have some fundamental problems. We have tremendous problems in affordability, right? And with that comes tremendous problems in waste. And so I believe that innovation, any path that creates a better healthcare system that not only reduces costs, but improves patient outcomes, it has to go through innovation. And what I found is that the innovation process, the process of taking something new, taking something different, is actually quite broken. I have not met a process in the healthcare industry in greater need of improvement than taking something that can really be quite powerful, both efficiency and effectiveness-wise, and bring it into common use throughout the healthcare system. And so over the course of my career, that is what ultimately led me to private equity. You see private equity in so many other sectors of our economy driving transformational change. And yet in healthcare, we really haven't seen that. And so that's what attracted me to private equity. That's what attracted me to investing in really compelling innovations. And as an investor, I think there's going to be pretty compelling returns. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am and how I think about innovation.
I want to talk about private equity in a little bit, but I also want to go back a little bit for just the healthcare space in general, because you came out of traditional healthcare before you went into private equity. And obviously, that's where you saw the need for more innovation and also more affordability.
Hi, I'm Raoul Powell. Sorry to interrupt your video, I know it's a pain in the arse, but look, I want to tell you something important. I can tell that you really want to learn about what's going on in financial markets and understand the global economy in these complicated times. That's what we do at Real Vision. So this YouTube channel is a small fraction of what we actually do. You should really come over to realvision.com and see the 20 or so videos a week that we produce of this kind of quality of content, the deep analysis and understanding of the world around us. So if you click on the link below or go to realvision.com, it costs you $1. I don't think you can afford to be without it.
Can you give me some experiences that walk me through some of the things that you were seeing that made it clear that, wait a minute, we need to get some innovation in here, and I can actually make a value add at traditional healthcare maybe, but then eventually, in the private equity space?
Sure. Well, I really started my career focused on serving the underserved. And so I did my internship and residency at Highland General Hospital in Oakland, California. This is, the county hospital of that area. And while I was doing my residency, this was just the time where the internet was really beginning to take off. And so I was surrounded by friends who were doing all kinds of interesting things, applying technology and using data to really disrupt and transform other industries. And yet, in my view, I was going to the hospital and was still relegated to paper and pen. And what I would tell my friends is, the average clinic patient that I have 15 minutes to deal with is more intellectually complex than any of the business problems that I've seen you guys deal with. It is shocking to me that we haven't made more effective use of technology and data in the delivery of healthcare. And so I began to actually use one of the first laptop computers. I built a rudimentary database, and I began to see immediate value. Within a county hospital environment with paper charts, we would have very, very ill patients in desperate need of care. And yet very often we didn't have an understanding of their clinical history because who knows where the paper chart was. And so my initial rudimentary database actually became quite valuable in giving physicians the information they need to provide optimal care, and also to avoid admissions on occasion when the patient had already been worked up. So very early in my career, in part because I was in the Bay Area, it really kind of showed to me there's a real opportunity here to make things better for patients and make care more affordable. And that's what attracted me to move out of the delivery of care environment and into more the business side of healthcare. So I went down to Stanford, got my MBA, and then came out and built a career really focused on a couple of things. The first was the application of technology and data to healthcare delivery. And the problem I had very early on, I worked on some early electronic medical records, but it became clear that electronic medical records were more what I would call an electronic file cabinet than really a data-driven infrastructure. And when I began to look around for sources of electronic data, that attracted me to health plans, because at the time, health plans had diagnostic information, procedural information, lab, pharmaceutical information. They were really the only place you could go to get electronic data at scale. And so I worked for Anthem in a variety of roles for 10 years, mainly as the CEO of HealthCore, an outcomes research division that I was the business sponsor for Anthem acquiring. And then later as the head of the HIT policy committee, or a member of the insurance industry representative of the HIT policy committee. That was the committee that allocated about $30 billion in taxpayer dollars. And that's why you see electronic medical records very broadly deployed in the healthcare industry today.
Right. And later on, you went into Aetna, and you also had an innovation role there. What was different about what was happening at Aetna for you? And then why did that lead afterwards into moving onto private equity?
Yeah, so, at Anthem, I was really committed to the intersection of data and technology and making the healthcare system better through using data and technology as a tool. But what I began to realize during my time at Anthem was that the technology is really only in support of a business model. And if you don't have the correct business model, you can have the best technology. You're not actually going to make a better healthcare system. You're not actually going to improve healthcare as much as you could. And so there was an opportunity to be the CEO of Accountable Care Solutions at Aetna. This was a division of Aetna focused on changing the business model in healthcare from one where we had traditionally paid physicians based on the volume of services, commonly known as fee-for-service, to where we pay physicians based on the value of the care that they received, with value being defined as quality over cost. And why that was important was that it allowed me to begin to experiment with aligning data and technology to a business model, a set of financial incentives that rewarded physicians for not only doing a great job, but for doing it in an efficient and effective way. And that was a tremendous success. Our business division grew from single-digit millions in 2011 to 1.9 billion at the end of 2014. And everything was working except for one fundamental problem. We ran out of innovations that could assist physicians in driving greater efficiency. We simply ran out of innovation. And so I began looking around for additional innovation. And what I found was that's going to come from small companies. And what do all small companies need with compelling innovation? Growth capital. And so that attracted me to private equity. And so most of the companies that I looked at in private equity, they really were focused more on kind of what I would call a checklist way to invest. Mm-hmm. And I really believed that what was needed was a mission-driven or purpose-driven private equity firm that was creating returns by creating a better healthcare system. And that's what we're doing today at Blue Ox.
Well, yeah, I think that's an interesting trajectory, moving to a smaller, more nimble part of the space. Two questions on that. One is about the pandemic and capital that can be allocated now. Is there a difference? And I think the second sort of interrelated question is where's the focus in terms of the life cycle of the company? How big are these companies that you're talking about that are being funded and where the money is being allocated?
Well, so the money's really being allocated all over the healthcare sector. It's quote unquote white hot time to be in healthcare investing. And our approach was really to focus on companies that aligned with value-based incentives. And our investment hypothesis is that if you look at companies that have abilities to improve our understanding of the individual, think about genomics, think about proteomic analysis, think about cellular morphology analysis. But the transformation in healthcare that I see is instead of giving a drug to populations of people and comparing them to a control group that is very similar but didn't get the drug or whatever the intervention is, we're now much more understanding individuals within that treatment arm. And by applying data and technology, not so much to healthcare delivery, which is where most of the work has been done to date, but rather to the basic science, the fundamental understanding of who you are and what your biochemical and cellular processes are doing. Those are the innovations that are really going to change the practice of medicine. And if we can influence how those innovations come to market, we can actually bring them to market in a way that both reduces cost as well as improves outcomes. So that's what we're trying to do. We typically find companies that, to use a baseball analogy, think about a 9-inning game. We try to get in about what we call the third or fourth inning. We look for companies that have cleared their regulatory hurdles, have a few customers, have some revenue, don't have to be profitable, but at least have demonstrated that they can service real customers. And then most importantly, their product set uses the interface of data and technology to the explosion and understanding of basic science and uses that to improve the care system. So we've been able to find a fair number of companies. We've really looked in the molecular diagnostics space, which is a very hot space. Think about Illumina and Grail, an $8 billion transaction. Think about Invitae and Archer, a transaction originally thought to be in the 250 to 500 million range, which ended up being valued by the market at 1.4 billion. So it's a very hot area. It's a very great space to be involved with. And if we can collaborate with others, specifically payers, I believe there's a really compelling opportunity to take those innovations, improve care, improve patient outcomes, and simultaneously take major costs out of the system.
I think that's really interesting. And this concept of individualization, of my individual parameters and putting that into effect. I'd love to drill down and get some specific examples of that. How your specific companies that you might be working with, and how that individualization occurs. One company I know that's associated with Blue Ox is SERA Prognostics. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and then we can go into some other companies that you work with.
Sure. So SERA Prognostics is a company we're very excited about. When you go to the fundamental challenges in the healthcare industry today, pregnancy and childbirth is always on the list. Think of all the employer groups who have young, healthy populations. What are they spending their money on? Generally, pregnancy and childbirth is pretty high up there. And when you look at things that really are challenging to payers and employer groups, it's very, very expensive claims, right? These outlier claims. And when you look at pregnancy, the leading outlier claim is going to be associated with preterm birth. Mm-hmm. Preterm birth does not get the attention it really deserves. 10% of all births in the United States are preterm, 1 in 10. And in some populations, such as African Americans, it approaches 1 in 5. And the problem with that is that not only is it common, it's increasing in frequency. The preterm birth rate has increased over the past 4 years. So it's a fundamental problem to solve from an affordability and value perspective. We spend about well over $32 billion on this as a nation. But it's also an equally compelling problem to solve from a family and a human perspective. When these babies are born at 23, 24 weeks, first of all, it's the number one driver of infant mortality. And there's nothing more catastrophic to a family than losing an infant. Secondly, these infants frequently require care throughout their entire lives. There are retinal issues, there are pulmonary lung issues, there are gastrointestinal issues, there are cerebral issues. And so not only are you talking about something that costs a lot during the actual birth and initial management of the child, a preterm baby can cost 20 times more than a healthy birth.
Wow.
But it's something that requires support often throughout the child's entire life. So the parent's productivity at the workplace goes down. The divorce rate goes up. It's a really great problem to make progress against, because you're really getting at the root of so many issues, both from a patient perspective and a cost perspective. What SERA Prognostics did was they collected blood samples from pregnant women all over the world, over 10,000 women. And they isolated the proteins produced by the placenta. And that's really important because the placenta is the interface between the baby and the mother. And if that's not working right, you're going to have problems with that pregnancy. And so they were able to find a couple of proteins that were 80% sensitive and specific in identifying the women who are going to deliver their babies early. And by arming the physicians with that information, the physicians can actually produce superior outcomes and reduce the cost of care.
Yeah, that's a great outcome. So in terms of thinking about this, I think you were talking to me when we first talked last time that, you might, let's say you're a doctor and you have 10 patients that you're looking for. How would you go about using SERA Prognostics? How would you figure out, okay, this is where the preterm is?
So the power of this is you take a simple blood test at weeks 19 to 20, which is where women are typically going to see their OBGYN for an ultrasound and other initial evaluations. And what comes back is a relative risk assessment and an absolute risk assessment. The reason that is such a powerful thing to know is that if I'm an OBGYN physician and I have 100 pregnant women that I'm working with, statistically, I know 10 of them are going to deliver their babies prematurely.
Right.
I just don't know which 10. And so the first question we had to ask was, can we identify those 10 women in a way that is actually useful for the physicians. And we've actually done that. We've had 2 studies published in the specialty journal for OBGYN physicians. It's the American Journal of OBGYN, Obstetrics and Gynecology. And they were both editor's choice. So we solidly cleared that hurdle. The next question is, okay, but when you empower the physician with that information, can they actually produce superior outcomes?
Right, yeah.
And we do have some information from some studies that have been done at Intermountain, which showed that when you use this test as compared to a control group, the babies are actually delivered in a healthier form, as measured by something called the NMI score, and they use dramatically less NICU or neonatal ICU resources, which is literally the most expensive care in the hospital.
Right.
So it's a perfect prototype of what we're talking about. Find the individual's risk, intervene on them more effectively and efficiently, and harvest economics as well as improve patient outcomes on the back end.
Yeah, that's a great story. And when I was doing some research on Blue Ox, I looked at 1 or 2 other companies that you're involved with that I thought would have been interesting to talk about. One was called Epic Sciences. Can you talk a little bit about that company?
Absolutely. Epic Sciences is another company aligned with our investment thesis. If you think about cancer, again, I don't think I have to explain, the importance of cancer and the cost associated with cancer care. But let's talk about it from an individual patient perspective. If a patient gets diagnosed with cancer, what do we typically do? We do some kind of primary intervention, maybe a surgical procedure, radiation, chemo, whatever the case may be. And let's say it's a surgical procedure. What does the physician typically say? I think we got it all. But
Right.
what the physician actually means when he says that is, I saw the primary tumor, I was able to take it out of your body, and I saw good, healthy margins around it. So it makes me say, I think I got all the primary tumor. But we know that cancer is much more complex than that. There are cancer cells actually migrating around the patient's body in the bloodstream. And we can actually detect those cancer cells. And that's what EPIC does. EPIC has the world's most sensitive rare cell detector. And by using that, we can take a routine blood sample, we can put it on a slide, and let's say there's maybe 3 million cells on that slide. We can get rid of all the normal cells. We can find the individual cancer cells in that bloodstream, in that blood sample, and we can characterize them. And by characterizing them, we can tell the physician all kinds of really important things. Yes, doctor, you did take the primary tumor out, but this patient has circulating tumor cells in their bloodstream, maybe circulating tumor DNA. And if you find that in a patient, you know they're at higher risk for relapse. So right after the primary intervention, we can tell the doctor, this is somebody who may need additional care, certainly needs additional surveillance because they're highly likely to recur. We can also help the physician when, let's say, 3-4 years have gone by and the patient presents with some symptoms or an x-ray or something is done and you find a lesion. You see something on a CT scan that says, uh-oh, this looks suspicious for recurrence of cancer. Many times when the person's ill, they're suffering, you probably don't want to put a needle to get tissue in some of the places that cancer goes, like the brain, certain parts of the lung. And so what we can do with this same technology is do a blood test. And what we find is that if we find circulating tumor cells and circulating tumor DNA in that patient's bloodstream, those characteristics align very closely with the characteristics of the lesion that you see in radiology. And physicians can use that information to begin to treat the patient, not only who should get treated, but also we can characterize those cells and tell the physician, here are the drugs that the patient is most likely to respond to. So it's really, we call it comprehensive cancer profiling. It's really a revolution in how we think about managing cancer.
Yeah, I mean, that really sounds exciting, I have to say. And, because cancer hits all of us, people in my family who I know, friends of mine who have died because of cancer and so forth, we're all touched by that. So that's really exciting. There was one last company that I saw that I thought was interesting and that I think viewers might find interesting too. Maybe you could talk a little bit about. It's called RX Solutions. I thought that was a third one that might elicit some interesting information.
Yeah, so that was actually the first deal we did together, and it was a smaller deal, but it was a deal we felt was quite important. As you may recall, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, one of the things that was done was pharmaceutical firms began to develop sponsorship programs where you may hear this on a pharmaceutical firm's advertisement. If you can't afford your medicine, such and such company may be able to help. Mm-hmm. What they've built are ways for patients to get access generally to branded medications, which are, extremely expensive, even with insurance, because of, deductibles are now up to $1,600. And so what these pharmaceutical firms have done is to create the ability to get access to these drugs at discounted prices. The problem for many consumers is that the process is so challenging, is so difficult, that a lot of them really struggle to get the information, to aggregate it, to present it, to keep current so that they get access to that information. And so that's what this company, we actually now call it Advocate My Meds, but that's what this company does. It assists individuals in getting access to branded medications that they cannot afford. Again, aligned with our objective of trying to make healthcare more affordable for people and making sure they get access to these drugs that can create superior outcomes.
Since, as you know, Real Vision, we're a financial media company, so we're always going to get into the numbers. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind after hearing those is you're a private equity guy. What's the exit strategy? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when you talk about this, about the third inning of 9, I'm thinking about venture capital. But you're a private equity guy. Maybe you can tell me why private equity, and then also what's the exit strategy for you?
Sure. So we don't consider ourselves venture for several reasons. One, we don't get involved in very, very early, so no seed stage. We've never done a Series A. So we don't get involved in that end of the business, quite frankly, because the failure rate is actually quite significant. And that's not where our expertise can be applied. Our expertise is really being applied in taking value-based incentives that health plans are coming to market with and aligning that with innovation. So we like to see a lot of those unsuccessful companies kind of already get weeded out before we invest. So third, fourth inning is kind of where we come in and after that hurdle has been cleared. What we typically do is try to stay in the investment between 3 and 5 years. And during that 3 to 5 years, we seek to create two things: relationships with health plans for reimbursement, as well as assist with the company's utilization strategy so that physicians are aware of this test or whatever the innovation is, and actually begin to use it in practice. If you can achieve those two things, you have a high likelihood of a successful innovation. We typically look for opportunities to exit in that 3 to 5 year time period based either on a strategic acquisition. So there are other companies that are larger than us that may want to take the company all the way to an IPO or an acquisition by a larger company. So we will sell out to other private equity firms from time to time. Some of these innovations have become so significant, like the pregnancy or the EPIC, SERA Prognostics or the EPIC Sciences example, that an IPO is very possible. So those are the kinds of exits we look at.
Very interesting, and I think also what's more interesting is, where we are. I think I touched upon it early on about the pandemic. I'd just like to get a general sense from you how you're thinking about the pandemic overall in general, just from a healthcare perspective and how it touches your profession and takeaways that all people can get from that.
Sure. Well, even though COVID has been an economic disaster for the United States, over 200,000 people killed, it actually was a proof point for our investment thesis. And let me unpack that a little bit. Remember, we talked about individuality, understanding the individual, and then creating precise actions that creates lower cost outcomes and superior outcomes. So what happened with COVID? Well, the initial plan was pretty solid. Broad testing, right, to identify individual risk. And then once you understood an individual's risk, contact trace, and then quarantine and isolate as appropriate. That made sense. It would have been efficient. It would have been effective. And if you look at other countries like South Korea that did this effectively, it's a proof point that we could have managed this in a effective way with a great outcome for our society. But what actually happened? We didn't have testing in place. Therefore, we could not make individualized assessment. Who has the disease, who doesn't, who's at risk because they came in contact with that person. And so what ended up happening? The disease spread as it was likely to do. And what did we do in response? We shut down whole states. We shut down whole city. Think about the economic consequences of that. Trillions of dollars in lost economic activity. And so the first point I would offer is COVID demonstrates that if you don't have the ability to assess individualized risk, the outcomes are worse, which is what we're experiencing, and the costs are greater. So it really aligned very well with our investment thesis. But it also teaches us something else. Mm-hmm. The first thing is when COVID was initially identified in China, what happened? A set of researchers in China actually were able to take the SARS-CoV-2 genome and post it on a public internet site. And from that point, over 125 vaccines are now in various stages of production against the coronavirus. And this, not only is it a huge amount of innovation, the speed is unprecedented.
Right, yeah.
If you think about the fastest a vaccine was ever brought to market before, it's the current mumps vaccine, which end-to-end was a little under 5 years in the 60s. But that was bringing viruses to market in the old way, where you weaken the lab, so you weaken the virus in the lab so that you get an immune response, but you don't cause the disease. Now, through genomics, through our ability to sequence, through our ability to manufacture proteins, we've been able to kick off phase 3 studies that started in dozens of sites around the US this summer. And there is a real hope that we could get a vaccine out in a year. So the second lesson of COVID is the speed of innovation in healthcare can be dramatically faster than it is. And so, again, it was really a proof point for our investment thesis. Innovation is the key, and the foundation is there because of the application of data and science to biology. So there's a new speed available in innovation. And if you align that innovation with testing, precise interventions, you can actually create a lower cost healthcare system and superior outcomes. It really aligns very well with what we're trying to achieve at Blue Ox.
Yeah, I love that optimism to end it there with sort of an optimistic take, because it's been sort of a grim period, and to think that we're learning things that can make us optimistic about our healthcare future, I think it's a great thing. So Dr. Charles Kennedy, it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this interview. This is just a taste of what we do at Real Vision. To learn more about the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy, click on the membership link in the description. Give us 7 days to change your life. This will be the best dollar you ever invest.